Hi, I am Dr. Greg Nigh, and welcome to another just white knuckled edition of the Deep Dive. So, today I'm going to follow up on a previous podcast I did about the paper that I was co authored on about innate immune suppression, and I kind of walked through kind of the findings of that paper. And today, I'm going to talk about the censorship that was happening behind the scenes because a lot of people, I don't think, really understand how intense the censorship is within academia. These people say follow the science or whatever. Uh, People saying that don't understand that there is a very deliberate attempt to mold and craft and control what constitutes the science. You keep certain voices out and you only let certain ones in. And that way you can say, well, there's a consensus about whatever. About whatever. So today I'm just going to try to be brief and tell you what happened with this paper. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is share my screen and hope that works. All right, so you should have a little pop-up right there somewhere. So again, this is the paper, the innate immune suppression paper. I've already talked about that. This paper was invited by the journal, by an editor who wanted to do an edition of the journal that was specifically devoted to talking about the potential risks of the mRNA shots. And so we were asked to submit a paper. We submitted the paper. The editor knew this was going to be very controversial. So he did something that he has never done before, and that is invite five reviewers on the paper. Typically, a paper gets two, maybe three reviewers. This one got five, one of whom was the editor himself. That is exceedingly rare. Very, very rare that the editor himself participates in the review, but he knew that there was going to be a lot of hubbub around this paper, and he wanted to make sure that this was a solid paper, totally backed by in the science by everything that was being said in the paper. So, five reviewers went through multiple peer review rounds and finally got to a paper, and we made lots of additions. It became a much better paper over the process of review. Ultimately, had a paper that was solid in every way. There was nothing that any of five reviewers, three of whom did not agree with our conclusion, but they couldn't find anything wrong with this with what we were, the literature we were citing. We were not misrepresenting anything. Okay, so we submit that paper, and you'll see this got published on June of the 22nd. And I want to just point out at the bottom of the screen here, notice there is a letter to the editor that was published in response to our paper. And that letter note, I think it shows here, it was published August of 23. Keep those dates in mind. Okay, so hopefully this will advance. Okay, as I mentioned, five reviewers, multiple rounds. Then this group of oncologists, there were, I don't know, you can see in the previous, there were probably six or seven of them that collectively submitted this letter to the editor. Barrier, I guess, I'm from Indiana, I'm not sure the French, but so they submitted a letter saying that we had misrepresented the data, that our message was dangerous, and that our article should be retracted. The editor should pull the paper because of all this. The editor, bless his heart, he put their letter through peer review. He submitted it to the reviewers, they went through it, and they found lots of misrepresentations in their letter. And they said, no, we're not publishing this. It's not up to snuff. Make modifications and resubmit. They made modifications, they resubmitted, went through peer review, failed again. They were not representing our paper accurately. So the editor said, no, we're not going to publish your letter. I'm not going to do it because it's not It's not a valid scientific critique of our paper. All right. So then he said, oh, okay. So the next step here, the people who submitted that, Barrier et al., they then appealed to the publisher. They went over the editor's head, appealed to the publisher, and said, you need to get this editor to publish this letter that we submitted, even even though it didn't pass the peer review. You got to get the editor to publish our letter, at least, if not retract, at least publish our letter. So the publisher then put pressure on the editor and said, all right, I think you got to publish this letter to the editor. The editor declined, saying it would be a violation of scientific integrity to publish this letter. Like it doesn't pass peer review. Why would I publish a letter if it can't pass peer review? So the editor said no. So that group, REA et al., they go to another journal and they write an article or this, editorial essentially that they submit to this other journal using our paper as an example of the kind of scientific misinformation and misrepresentation that journal editors need to be responsible for not publishing. That they either have to not publish it or retract it when it's discovered. Our paper, saying, they was published in this journal and it contains unsubstantiated claims and misunderstandings and should be retracted. So they go to this other journal, they get their complaint about our paper published in this other journal. All right, so by this point, the editor of the journal we published in, he was getting attacked viciously, personally attacked, professionally attacked. He said it was just relentless criticism of him for not retracting our article. And to his great credit, he refused amidst the endless attacks that he was getting, and it was a lot. He said, no, I'm not going to retract the article. It was a fine article. It passed everything about peer review. Nothing in it was misrepresented. So his contract was coming up very soon, and it would be renewed for another 8 years, and that would be typical. But he had 1 year left before that renewal, and the journal he said it was very clear that the journal was not going to be renewing his contract, and due to the relentless attacks on him and his integrity, he resigned. Prior to the end of his contract, he decided he would just resign. So, of course, what happened? He resigns, and the replacement editor published the letter that was submitted by Barrier et al., the one that the previous said, no way, it doesn't pass peer review. So the replacement, of course, the publisher wanted to replace that guy with somebody who would be more friendly to what they want him to do. So he publishes that letter that was a complaint about ours. Now, I would say to his credit, so we were supplied with the letter that they had written complaining about our paper and how it misrepresented things. At least the new editor allowed us to write a response to it, which we did. And you can find it linked on the same page as all, the initial article and the Barrier et al. Then you can see our response to them. I encourage you to read it because we demolish them with an enormous amount of quotes from the literature that make it very, very clear that their complaints were misrepresentations of our paper. So the outgoing editor then, and here is his name that I won't even attempt because again, Indiana, wrote us an email. He sent it to it was me and Dr. Stephanie Seneff, Dr. Peter McCullough, and Dr. Anthony Kyriakopoulos were the four of us on this paper. The editor, outgoing, the one who resigned, sent us an email. I mean, it's fairly long, describing what he was going through in the attacks against him and his character, and how brutal it was, and his decision to resign, and just a piece of that email that he said, please inform your colleagues and spread on your social networks and on the internet what has happened to me, and in maintaining my scientific independence and not giving in to into claims of the heads of the journal Food and Chemical Toxicology, where we published, who kindly suggested publishing the letter to the editor that I rejected. That is the policy of the journal, which is if a letter doesn't meet standards, you reject it. Needless to say more, with the diffusion of this, and English is not his first language, so it's not, maybe it doesn't sound totally natural in English, but with the diffusion of this, you may help to know the handling and connivances between certain scientific journals and corporate interests. So, turn that off. So, he then, I think he went on to another editorship at another journal, I believe, but I'm not sure, and I should check on that. But I just wanted to give some background on some of the politics that are going on, because we pushed very, very hard and met lots of reviewer demands and replies and rebuttals and all that to make sure our paper stayed on track. There are maybe a lot of researchers, I guarantee you, there are lots of researchers out there submitting their material who get met with resistance, who don't have the time or the resources to go through that rebuttal process, even more who are meeting up with editors who simply are rejecting their papers. We have lots of papers that are simply rejected before they're even reviewed. They're not even read. We just are told, no, we're not going to publish this kind of paper. So that is a tiny little smidgen of the kind of politics that are happening within academia. Of course, not just around COVID, but absolutely, it became sort of an institutionalized phenomenon within COVID. So I hope that is kind of a peek behind the curtain, and I will be back again soon with another exciting edition of the Deep Dive.